Jake Martinez had what you might generously call a reputation on Galactic Station Zeta. Not the good kind either. The kind where other species crossed to the opposite side of the corridor when they saw him coming to lunch. The kind where the medical bay kept a special human Jake protocol file that was thicker than most species' entire medical databases. It wasn't because Jake was violent or unstable. No, Jake's crime against galactic civilization was far worse in the eyes of his alien crewmates. Jake ate poison. For fun. On purpose. With a smile. "There goes the crazy human again," whispered Blorbet, a gelatinous slurian whose entire body rippled with disgust as Jake walked past carrying his lunch tray. "I heard he puts chemical weapons on his food and calls it seasoning." Jake caught the comment and grinned, holding up a bottle of Tabasco sauce he'd smuggled from Earth. "Want some?" he offered cheerfully. Blorbet's translucent form immediately turned a sickly green color, and he slithered away as fast as his pseudopods could carry him. This was daily life aboard Station Zeta, humanity's first joint venture in intergalactic cooperation. 300 species working together in harmony, sharing knowledge, culture, and cuisine. Well, mostly sharing. Jake had learned early on that sharing his Earth hot sauces was considered somewhere between assault with a deadly weapon and biological warfare by most of his colleagues. The station's social hub buzzed with the usual mixture of clicks, whistles, electronic beeps, and what sounded suspiciously like someone gargling marbles. Jake had gotten pretty good at understanding the basics of most languages, but the universal translators handled the heavy lifting. What the translators couldn't handle was the constant undercurrent of bewilderment whenever Jake's eating habits came up in conversation. "I still don't understand how his species survived natural selection," chittered Dr. Vex, but a mantis-like Clickarian whose compound eyes tracked Jake's movement across the dining hall. Deliberately consuming caustic substances should have eliminated them from the gene pool millennia ago. "Maybe that's why they're so aggressive," suggested Humphrey, a furry Wombanian who always spoke in hushed, worried tones. "It's constant internal pain from their diet. It explains the wars, the territorial expansion, the way they volunteer for the most dangerous jobs." Jake pretended not to hear. He'd tried explaining that humans actually enjoyed spicy food, that the capsaicin was harmless, that it was a cultural thing. The explanations only made it worse. Now half the station thought humans were masochists with broken pain receptors, and the other half thought they were insane adrenaline junkies who found regular food boring. To be fair, that second half wasn't entirely wrong. Chef Glorbnax was having none of it. The 8-armed tentaclon had built his reputation on creating what he called transcendent culinary experiences that could satisfy the palates of dozens of different species. His kitchen was a temple to galactic gastronomy, equipped with flavor synthesizers that could replicate the taste preferences of beings from methane-breathing gas giants to silicon-based rock eaters. And yet somehow this one human remained unimpressed. "It's not possible," Glorbnax muttered to himself, all 8 tentacles working furiously as he prepared the lunch service. "I am the master of 17 different spice categories. I have created flavor profiles that can stimulate neural pathways species didn't even know they had. No being in the galaxy has ever called my cuisine bland." Except Jake Martinez. Jake, who had politely tried Glorbnax's volcanic delight, a dish so intensely flavored that it came with a medical waiver, and asked if there was any real seasoning available. Jake, who had somehow obtained clearance to bring his own condiments aboard the station, condiments that required special storage protocols usually reserved for hazardous materials. The final straw came during yesterday's lunch rush when Jake had offered to help spice up the daily special by adding something called sriracha to the communal pot. The resulting evacuation of the dining hall had made station-wide news. 3 different species required oxygen therapy. The crystalline ambassador had to be regrown from a backup crystal after his primary form cracked from thermal shock. "That's it," Glorbnax announced to his kitchen staff, waving several tentacles dramatically. "Today we settle this once and for all. I will create something so intensely flavorful, so perfectly calibrated to overload even a human's defective taste receptors, that this Jake Martinez will finally understand what true culinary artistry means. Word spread quickly through the station's gossip network. The Hive Collective's drones buzzed with excitement, their shared consciousness practically vibrating with anticipation. The betting pools opened within hours, with most of the smart money going on Glorbnax. After all, he was a professional chef with access to spices and flavor compounds from across the galaxy. Jake was just a maintenance worker with questionable judgment and what appeared to be severe nerve damage in his mouth. By lunchtime, half the station had found excuses to be in or around the dining hall. The observation deck was packed with beings who wanted to witness history in the making. Some brought recording equipment. Others brought medical supplies just in case. Dr. Chitnis, the station's head physician, arrived with a full emergency medical team. Her insectoid features were arranged in what might have been concern, if you could read Hive Collective expressions. "I feel obligated to point out," she announced to the gathered crowd, "that we have no comprehensive data on human tolerance for tentaclon spice compounds. This could be genuinely dangerous." "That's what makes it fun," Jake replied cheerfully, completely missing the point that nobody else thought potential hospitalization counted as entertainment. The crowd murmured in a mixture of languages, the universal translators working overtime to keep up with the excitement. Bets were being placed, medical equipment was being prepared, and somewhere in the kitchen, Glorbnax was putting the finishing touches on what he was calling his masterpiece. When Glorbnax emerged from the kitchen, he was wearing full protective gear. Not the light apron and hairnet you might expect from a chef, but the kind of environmental suit usually reserved for handling radioactive materials on mining asteroids. Behind him, his kitchen staff followed at a safe distance, also suited up, carrying what looked suspiciously like a hazardous waste container. "Behold," Glorbnax announced, his voice slightly muffled by the respirator, "thermonuclear tentacle tears. The culmination of my life's work in extreme flavor enhancement." The container required 2 assistants to carry it safely. They set it down on a specially prepared table that had been cleared of all other food items and covered with protective sheeting. A small crowd of maintenance robots immediately began setting up containment barriers around the designated tasting area. Dr. Chitnis approached with her medical scanner, took one reading, and immediately stepped back. "Glorbnax, the energy readings from that container are off the charts. Are you absolutely certain this is food and not some kind of weapon?" "The line between intense cuisine and chemical warfare is thinner than most beings realize," Glorbnax replied proudly. "This sauce combines 7 different classes of capsaicinoids from 3 different star systems, fermented in the digestive acids of a greater void worm, and concentrated using quantum flavor enhancement techniques that are still classified by the Galactic Culinary Guild." Jake watched this entire production with the mild interest of someone observing an elaborate magic trick. "So it's spicy, huh?" The collective gasp from the assembled crowd could have depressurized a small cargo bay. Even suggesting that thermonuclear tentacle tears was merely spicy was like calling a supernova a little warm or describing faster than light travel as pretty quick. "Human Martinez, Doctor." Chitnis interrupted, her medical ethics finally overriding her scientific curiosity. "I must insist that you sign this comprehensive medical waiver before proceeding. Additionally, I'll need to establish IV access, prepare antacid compounds, and have a full surgical team on standby." "For hot sauce?" Jake asked. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several aliens made gestures that their culture is considered protective against evil spirits or profound stupidity. The crystalline observer actually physically restructured his form to move further away from the conversation. Glorbnax began the unsealing process, which involved no fewer than 3 different types of locks and what appeared to be a small religious ceremony. As the container opened, a visible vapor rose from inside. The vapor itself seemed to have malicious intent, spreading across the protective barriers and causing nearby electronic equipment to emit warning beeps. "The testing spoon has been specially manufactured from thermally resistant titanium alloy," Glorbnax explained. producing an implement that looked more like a tiny industrial tool than cutlery. Standard utensils would simply dissolve on contact. Jake peered at the sauce, which was bubbling slightly despite not being heated. The color was difficult to describe in any language, partly because it kept changing and partly because most species' optical systems weren't designed to process something that seemed to bend light around it. Jake said thoughtfully. Looks like it might actually have some kick to it. The moment of truth arrived with all the ceremony of a small religious festival. Medical equipment hummed on standby, recording devices captured every angle, and half the station's population held their breath in whatever gas mixture they happened to breathe. Jake took the titanium spoon from Glorbnax with the casual confidence of someone reaching for the salt shaker. No protective equipment, no hesitation, no apparent concern for the fact that the substance on the spoon was still actively bubbling and had begun to etch small marks in the indestructible serving utensil. "Bottoms up," Jake said, and casually licked the spoon clean. The crowd waited, and continued waiting. Jake chewed thoughtfully, like someone trying to identify all the ingredients in a complex dish. His expression didn't change. His skin didn't change color. He didn't collapse, scream, or burst into flames. He didn't even sweat. "Interesting," Jake finally said. "Definitely got some heat to it. Nice complexity in the flavor profile, too. I'm getting some smoky notes, maybe a little citrus in the back end. Pretty good stuff." Dr. Chitnis immediately rushed forward with her medical scanner, running it over Jake's vital signs with the intensity of someone trying to detect a bomb. "This is impossible," she muttered. "His core temperature hasn't even increased. Brain activity normal. Digestive system showing no signs of distress. It's like he just tasted water." Glorbnax's 8 tentacles hung limply at his sides. In his entire career, across dozens of worlds and hundreds of species, no being had ever described thermonuclear tentacle tears as merely pretty good stuff. He'd seen crystalline entities crack from thermal shock just from being in the same room when the container was opened. He'd watched gas giant inhabitants temporarily lose cohesion from a single molecule of vapor. "More?" Jake asked politely. The word sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. More. He wanted more. Of a substance that was legally classified as a hazardous material in 17 different star systems. I don't understand," Glorbnax stammered. "The quantum flavor enhancers alone should have overloaded your neural pathways. The concentrated capsaicinoids should have caused immediate tissue damage. The greater void worm acids should have dissolved your digestive system." Jake shrugged. "I mean, it's got some zip to it, but it's not like it's Carolina Reaper level hot or anything. This is more like a decent habanero sauce. Maybe a little milder than the ghost pepper salsa I had last week." Several aliens required medical attention just from hearing those words. The Hive Collective's drones began buzzing in patterns that translated roughly to the human as speaking in tongues, and we may need to recalibrate our understanding of reality. Dr. Chitnis was frantically taking notes. "Jake, I need you to understand something. What you just consumed would be fatal to 97% of known sentient species. The remaining 3% would require immediate hospitalization. You're talking about it like it's a casual snack." "Well," Jake replied, "considering this information, maybe that explains why you guys think ketchup is too spicy." The station's rumor network had never operated at peak efficiency quite like this before. Within an hour, everyone knew that the human had not only survived Glorbnax's ultimate culinary weapon, but had actually asked for seconds. The betting pools had closed early when it became clear that no one had predicted this outcome. Several species were demanding their money back on the grounds that the results defied known physics. But Jake wasn't done yet. "You know what," he said, addressing the still stunned crowd, "this has been fun, but I feel like we're being a little unfair here. You guys keep testing me with your food, but I never get to return the favor. How about we level the playing field?" Dr. Chitanis looked up from her medical readings with the expression of someone who had just heard the universe's worst idea. Jake, I really don't think that's wise. Different species have vastly different tolerances for. Oh, come on, Jake interrupted cheerfully. It's only fair. Besides, this is just some mild stuff I brought from Earth. Nothing too crazy. Kid-friendly, really. He produced a small bottle from his personal storage locker. The label read Carolina Reaper Hot Sauce in friendly, innocent-looking fonts. There was even a cute cartoon Pepper wearing sunglasses and giving a thumbs up. See? Jake said, holding up the bottle. How dangerous could something with a cartoon mascot be? The assembled aliens studied the bottle with the intense scrutiny usually reserved for analyzing enemy weapon systems. The container appeared harmless enough, just a standard glass bottle with colorful labeling. No warning symbols, no protective seals, no indication that it required hazardous material handling protocols. Glorbnax, his professional pride still smarting from the earlier defeat, stepped forward. Human Martinez, I appreciate the gesture, but after what we just witnessed, I hardly think your mild earth seasoning will present much of a challenge. Several other aliens murmured agreement. After all, they'd just seen their most extreme culinary creation treated like a light appetizer. How intense could something from a single planet possibly be? Tell you what, Jake offered, let's make it interesting. Same deal as before. Whoever wants to try it goes first. No protective gear, no medical prep. Just like I did with yours. The volunteer line formed quickly. Species from across the galaxy, all eager to prove that they could handle whatever primitive seasoning a single planet species could produce. Glorbnax led the charge, followed by several members of the Hive Collective who shared sensation across their neural network, for a few crystalline entities who considered themselves immune to chemical effects, and even a gas giant representative who existed in a state that technically shouldn't be affected by solid matter at all. Jake carefully measured out tiny drops onto individual testing spoons. Now remember, he said with the kind of helpful tone that should have been a warning, this is just a Carolina Reaper sauce. It's only about 2.2 million on the Scoville scale. That's pretty mild by Earth standards. My grandmother used to put this stuff on her breakfast cereal. The first volunteer, a confident Tentaclon warrior named Blex Tar who prided himself on his iron digestive system, stepped forward. 2.2 million of what? He asked. Oh, that's just how we measure spiciness on Earth, Jake explained helpfully. It's called the Scoville scale. For reference, a bell pepper is about 0 Scovilles. A jalapeno is around 5,000. Blex Tar's confidence only increased. Your entire measurement system only goes up to 2 million? How charmingly quaint. He took the spoon and consumed the entire sample in one decisive motion. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. The medical bay of Galactic Station Zeta had never seen anything quite like the great hot sauce incident of 2387. Dr. Chitnis and her staff worked frantically to treat a condition that had no name in any medical database, mass casualties from mild Earth breakfast seasoning. Blex Tar, the first volunteer, had achieved what the medical staff were calling a spectacular physiological cascade failure. His tentacles had tied themselves into knots that required a mathematical consultant to untangle. The Hive Collective drones were buzzing in emergency distress patterns, sharing the sensation of Carolina Reaper heat across their entire neural network and effectively incapacitating 3% of their planetary population. The crystalline entities had stress fractured into roughly geometric shapes and were slowly reforming while emitting high-pitched whimpering sounds. The gas giant representative had somehow managed to precipitate out of his gaseous state entirely and was now a very confused puddle on the medical bay floor, occasionally bubbling with what Dr. Chitnis could only describe as atmospheric panic. Jake, Dr. Chitnis called out as she administered the 17th dose of emergency coolant to Glorbnax, who was speaking in tongues and claiming he could see through time. I need to understand something. You said this was mild by Earth standards. Please tell me you were exaggerating. Jake, who was calmly finishing his lunch while surrounded by the aftermath of galactic culinary warfare, considered the question. Well, I mean, it's definitely on the spicy side. But it's not like it's a ghost pepper or a Trinidad Moruga scorpion or anything really intense. And it's nowhere near some of the synthetic stuff we've been working on. There's this thing called Pepper X that clocks in around 3.18 million Scovilles, and the military's been experimenting with some concentrated capsaicin compounds that... Stop, Dr. Chittinis interrupted, her compound eyes reflecting what might have been existential terror. Just stop talking. I need to file a report with the Galactic Health Organization about potential biological weapons disguised as food products. It's not a weapon, Jake protested. It's just hot sauce. My nephew puts this stuff on his pizza. The medical bay fell silent except for the continued whimpering from the crystalline patients and the occasional bubble from the precipitated gas giant. Even the medical equipment seemed to pause in disbelief. Glorbnax, now stabilized but still experiencing what he described as flavor-induced temporal displacement, managed to speak through his chemical-resistant breathing apparatus. "Human Martinez," he said with the tone of someone experiencing a profound religious revelation, "I withdraw my challenge. I concede defeat. I bow before your species' inexplicable mastery of culinary self-destruction." "Oh, come on," Jake replied. "It wasn't that bad. Besides, your stuff actually had some decent heat to it. Mind if I take a bottle to go? I was thinking it might be good on eggs." The request sent several patients back into medical crisis. Dr. Chittinis immediately began preparing sedatives. And that's how Jake Martinez became the first human in galactic history to break an interstellar medical system with what he considered a light snack. Station Zeta's incident report, filed under biological hazard, extreme cultural dietary practices, became required reading at the Galactic Safety Academy. Jake's personal hot sauce collection was reclassified as restricted xenobiological materials and required special storage permits. But Jake didn't mind the new regulations. After all, he'd finally found an alien chef who could make something with actual flavor. And he still had that bottle of Pepper X in his emergency supply kit, just waiting for the right occasion. The next time someone wanted to test human limits, he'd be ready.